Well, we're going to pretend like everybody can see and hear us. And we'll just chat with ourselves. Although there is a portion at the end of this class that is kind of a practicum where we're going to share some challenges that have been seen in the marketplace. So she's going to do that. And then I needed someone to role play with me on getting a buyer brokerage engagement signed. So hopefully somebody can figure out how to unmute themselves and share their screen or turn their camera on. Just need a volunteer. So we'll be asking for that shortly. I'm going to go ahead. I think we have everything pulled up. So basically what we want to start with is this is the Ninja Skill Sets group, and it is a skill set group. We do have a PowerPoint that's attached to this. We're going to go through a brief overview of what you learned in Ninja. That's just about the basics of negotiation. It is not meant to be a regurgitation verbatim of everything in Ninja. It's just a brief overview. So we're going to go over that quickly. Mindset for today's class is basically whatever attitude you bring to the table is the one that everybody else has too. So know that you have to be in a positive mindset and a positive frame of mind and come with curiosity in negotiations. Because when you come from that place, you will find that win-win middle ground. And I'll tell you this plainly. You can come to the table and be an average practitioner of real estate and have really, really good negotiation skills and still win. You can be the best technically that you could possibly be and know and understand everything about the contract and be able to present it upside down and backwards to a client and have mediocre negotiation skills, and lose every single time. So I know Harry Norman, we roll out a lot of classes on negotiation. I teach one that is just negotiation for 3 hours. Sherry Reimer, the broker of the Coming Office, and I are creating one on new construction negotiation right now that'll come out sometime within the next month or so. And we're also going to have a shoe. Hopefully she can join us on that one too. And as well as a builder, a long-term builder that builds in that $1 million price point to help you so that you can negotiate a final walkthrough and then the year-long warranty period afterwards. That's the builder warranty. So that'll be a good class, all with the same fundamentals. So negotiation skills are key to success in this business. And that's one reason why we teach them and teach them over and over and over again. And all of you are Harry Norman realtors. So you're the best in the business. And to have a successful business, this is a key part that you need to practice over and over and over again. So with that being said, bear with me while I try to bring up the PowerPoint. And we'll go through this skill set pretty quickly. Ashu, let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. Now let's wait for PowerPoint to decide it wants to wake up and play with us today.
And I got several notes that everybody can hear us just fine. They're unmuted. That's why they couldn't respond. So they were trying.
Okay, good. All right, come on, baby. Let's open. Why is my PowerPoint not opening? Let's see if we've got it on here somewhere else. Don't want to X out of that. Come on. If not, we'll do it without the PowerPoint. It'll be fun. We have that technology. Let's see. Come on.
Negotiate better ways, right?
Right. Negotiate our ways out of a paper bag. Maybe not. Why is this not? Have hamster wheels and a frozen screen, which is fun. Okay. McFly. Why is this not working? Okay, we have nothing. All right, Ashu, we're going to do it backwards. Why don't you go ahead? Do you have what you need? Can you do
Yeah,
yours?
I don't need the PowerPoint necessarily to get through the points that I was going to hit. I know the PowerPoint was going to help you kind of lay out the context of
It's okay.
um,
Let you go ahead and start, and we'll start with the practicum, and then we'll back into it and then do the rest later. I'm just going to pull up what I emailed you, so I have it on my phone for reference.
okay.
So we'll just do it backwards. It's no big deal. We'll figure it out.
Okay, that works. So you're going to learn some talking points on, just what negotiation tips are in general. Ninja defines negotiation skill as negotiating the quote unquote gap between countering expectations, whether it be the seller and buyer countering expectations, or you as representative of the broker negotiating with your seller client or buyer client in order to find a mutually acceptable common ground. And so some of the slides that Jill will go through will kind of give you the context for navigating through tough negotiations in general. But it's the same concepts that would apply when you are trying to negotiate, present, negotiate, and obtain a prospective buyer client signature on a buyer brokerage agreement, for example. So I wanted to touch on that item quite a bit, and maybe even do the role play that Jill suggested, to see how you can accomplish it successfully out there in the field, because there are certainly different styles and different ways of accomplishing it. But I would like for you to hear from me why it's important for you to accomplish the signature on a buyer brokerage agreement. So the buyer brokerage agreement, as you guys know, defines the responsibilities of buyer's representative and buyer's obligations. So it defines your responsibilities as buyer's agent and our responsibilities as buyer's broker, and of course, in exchange, the buyer's obligations to us. It most importantly provides for compensation to be paid to buyer's representative for assisting that buyer for their home search or negotiation. So it locks down our paycheck, your paycheck. Georgia law says you cannot represent a buyer as a client without a signed written agreement outlining the terms of the representation. And the GAR buyer brokerage agreement meets the requirements of Georgia law to accomplish that. When should you get the buyer brokerage agreement signed? As soon as you start performing real estate services for the client. So you are not performing those services unlawfully, since I just told you it's required under license law to be signed by the client. You may be uncomfortable with formalizing such a relationship so early, or you may think a handshake is good enough. But I caution you, because what you're doing is putting your license plus eventually your paycheck at risk and on the line when you don't carry through with getting the buyer brokerage agreement signed. Some talking points for negotiating signature with the buyer. I would suggest as follows, and again, some of this can come up in the role playing that Jill can do with one of you, but we know that the agreement essentially helps the agent in ensuring buyer doesn't waste her time by asking her to show multiple homes and then buyer asking his cousin, Bubba, or whoever to write the offer. But when explaining the agreement to buyer, what you are best to do is focus on it, how it helps buyer's cause. It shouldn't be about you, your protection, your paycheck, buyer's obligations to you, and all of those sort of things that we know are good things contained in this agreement. But when negotiating their kind of buy into this and signature on such a formalized relationship, it's best to focus on how it helps buyer's cause. For buyer, signing the agreement ensures him or her that they have a realtor legally committed to representing their interests and their interests alone. With this representation, the agent's looking out for them and not for the sellers, and they can be sure of that. So that's in their best interest to sign it and make sure that that relationship is locked down. It also, when that's in place, it also ensures confidentiality. The buyer's agent cannot share any of buyer's information with the seller without buyer's permission to do so. So it binds them to that promise of confidentiality. So for example, you cannot divulge the buyer's offer of, say, $450,000 for a home is a lowball offer, because the buyer may be ultimately interested in going up to $500,000 to have the home of their dreams. That's between you and buyer, and as far as strategy to negotiate the best price for the buyer, and the buyer can be assured that you're going to be preserving that confidentiality and keeping that secret between you and buyer to yourself when you're negotiating their best cause, if they've signed the buyer brokerage agreement setting out that arrangement. Real estate agents must always disclose which party they represent in transaction, and this document clarifies that for not just you, but for all the parties involved who you're representing, in the deal. And that again is a good highlight for the buyer. So basically explain how this is a document that protects them, it protects their interests, and if they're ultimately, their heartburn or concern is about being tied to you, even though they may not be happy with your service or you failed in your service somehow, you can explain to them, the option of a friendly and mutual walk away, particularly if buyer wants to purchase a home that the buyer wasn't shown or introduced by you, or it wasn't, your representation or efforts that kind of led them to that, or you could exclude some homes they found already before they hired you, or you could offer to reduce the time period for representation. Just some best kind of backup alternative positions for you to keep in mind and in your back pocket as you try to get your wished buyer brokerage arrangement in place with them. Jill may even have some more tips from her in the field experience, but these are some things that I offer up to you as far as some talking points that can lead you, to a comfortable signature with the buyer. So that's all about how to help the buyer realize that this is in their well-being to sign. But as you know, it's also a document that protects you as well. So with that in mind, you need to absolutely make strong effort to get it signed by the buyer. It limits your duties, it limits your liability, it ensures your commission, your paycheck. Without it, you could be placed in a position to have to prove yourself as a procuring cause of the sale. If buyer does end up using another agent to buy the home that you helped buyer find, and that's a very tough factual and legal standard to meet. So written contract certainly makes your right and collection of that and to get paid easier. It also gives important alerts and warnings to buyer about cyber fraud, which is a new add to the form. And since that's a huge risk out there in terms of how much it happens and what the cost of it happening can be, that's a great protection you've got built into the new buyer brokerage form. There's of course property disclosure protections in there, and these are again high dollar risk claims that you want to be protected against, but only if you have buyer signature on them. And with the most recent GAR Forms committee updates, it also shortens the time period that a person has to bring a claim against you and broker if they are happy about the services or claim that there was some wrongdoing. So of course that's to your benefit, and you will also ensure for yourself that you got E&O defense if a claim does occur. So those are all kind of good things on your behalf that are contained in this few pages. that might make you more comfortable with getting a buyer more comfortable with signing. But you know, your heartburn on that uncomfort is not alone. The GAR Forms Committee recognized how the form could be difficult to get signed in the past, so they've made it more fairly balanced to help buyers get more comfortable with it and help you to get it signed. Now, I'm all about, you know, you're hearing me here with these tips and suggestions and the good reasons behind getting this done, but there's nothing more impactful and powerful than a case out there that really shows why this should be done. And I found an interesting one that actually involves someone that you may know, Taylor Swift, of all people. She landed in a lawsuit for failing to sign a buyer representation agreement and getting that signed related to her New York townhome purchase pretty recently. I think 2018 was the year. Google to find it on realtor.com for specific details, but she had been working with a real estate agent, and of course celebrities work with an agent through their handlers or management team due to just privacy, confidentiality issues, or they just don't want to be bothered, so they have their people handling it. So it was her management team involved that used this real estate agent for 2 years to help find Taylor's dream New York townhome. The agent that filed suit against her for his commission claimed that he had been given a quote unquote written exclusive promise in the form of an email promising to involve him in her purchase for a 6% commission in return. But Taylor Swift ended up buying without him, so he sued her for more than $1 million in commission. Basically, the facts are that over a 2-year period, he had shown the property that was right next door to the property that she already owned there, but it was not yet on the market. While he received an email from her handler or management company saying that she would solely work with him to purchase the property, all of a sudden communications stopped with him, and he assumed Taylor had just decided that she didn't want to buy the place, but then after 7 months learned that she had actually bought it without using him and by using another broker. So this is a pretty classic case of what can happen even with a solid handshake made in an email, and why you must get the buyer brokerage agreement signed to protect your paycheck in addition to have your services be legal. It's very likely that the case settled out of court, guys, but it's a lesson for you certainly of getting this signed, and as well as for the home buyer on getting the agreement signed. Emails don't automatically count as a legally binding contract. I think that was the takeaway from this case. Under Georgia law, as I mentioned before, the agency agreement's got to contain certain items and elements to be valid. So that's why you're encouraged to use the GAR form rather than rely on any informal promise or some email promise. So Jill, I hand it off to you to grab a partner and see how you might best be able to present and negotiate a buyer brokerage agreement out there.
Okay, so no one's volunteered yet, so we'll wait for that. I do have the PowerPoint up on my phone, and I'm just going to go over some brief things. Now, as you know, there are several contracts and contract points that we negotiate. We negotiate purchase and sale agreements, we negotiate listing agreements, we negotiate ATAX, amendment to address concerns. There are all of those negotiations. The negotiation tactics that I'm going to use today in what we're doing is all about win-win. It's all about a collaborative way of negotiating. It's not about going in, digging in, and fighting. We are cooperating brokers, so we really should try to find that middle ground and a space where it's there that everyone achieves something that they want for their side of the table. And then everyone is happy. And it's not about just trying to get to the middle, like splitting the difference. It's not about that. It's about truly asking great questions and trying to get to a point where in asking those questions during a listing presentation, during a buyer presentation, by the time you get to a purchase and sale, you know the goals and the needs and what success looks like to your client, regardless of whether they're a buyer or a seller. Ashu and I actually decided to work with the buyer agency agreement, and perhaps the ATAC, if we have time. We may or may not have time for that one. But to show you how it works here, only because a lot of you are waiting to get that buyer brokerage engagement signed at the last minute, if at all, or your office staff or brokers chasing you down to get it signed. So I'm going to take the allergy out of trying to get it signed for you and give you some techniques based on what Ashu said that will help you articulate those things to a client. You and I and Ashu can sit here on this conversation and understand the different points of the contract and know what she's talking about. It's a whole different animal to be able to explain that buyer brokerage engagement, coming to a place of common ground. Like she said, you don't want it about this is how I get paid. You want to bring them to the points of recognizing that there is a collaborative effort here. This is how I feed my family, but it's also how you're protected. It's our playbook of how we come together and go and find you a house. It's your obligations to this relationship and my obligations to this relationship. And we set them forth in a contract so everybody's playing from the same playbook. That's basically all it is. And if you do get someone belligerent, like Ashu said, you can pick it up and go, hey, it's right here on the top. It's the law. You got to sign it. Make it the broker's fault. So we'll go through some of those. Is there anybody out there that wants to turn their camera and mic on and play along? Somebody. I know there's several Woodstock agents on here. You've done this plenty of times. It's called a skill set group. It's not about just sitting here and listening to us yak. It's about practice. So who's in? Ashu, do you see anybody from your end?
I think Avery said we need to check under questions for any comments, because I don't see anything in chat.
I have the questions like drop down, but I've got hamster wheels spinning on my end. So Avery, you're driving this boat next time. Yeah, I've just got hamster wheels spinning every time I try to get the drop down for the questions, so I can't see anybody on here. It's not giving me.
Maybe see if you can grab Avery and the two of you just kind of role play it out for the other shy ones to watch and learn from. Just an idea.
Let me find attendees. Let's find Avery. Avery, sorry, girl, you're it. Avery McMahon, you are unmuted.
Let's do it. I don't know if you can see.
Is there a way? Yeah, is there a way to make it so that you can? I don't see it on here. It's not allowing me.
Yeah, I think the power has been taken away from the participants, Jill. That's why we're having that trouble. So
I like that.
you
I like
unmuted
to have power. I have people to have, I like to have power. All right, Avery, if you just want to be the buyer, and then what I'm going to do, now, I'll tell you this, everybody that I have trained as a new agent, and most of the brokers I know, Avery does this the same way. When you're a new agent, you need to know your forms. Now, as I said before, being perfect on your forms and having no skill set for negotiation is not going to let you win. So skill set for negotiation is key, but you have to know the form to be able to explain it. So anybody out there that is a new agent or a seasoned agent and you don't know how to explain this form, know that your broker, especially if they're on this class right now, they're going to come to you and tell you sometime in the next 2 weeks, all right, explain the buyer brokerage engagement to me upside down and backwards. And what that means is you're going to take a buyer brokerage engagement form, you're going to lay it down upside down and backwards to them, and you're going to go through the talking points and explain that to them in layman's terms so they understand what they're signing and they can ask questions. That's a level of trust that you need to build in a buyer conversation, in a buyer presentation. And if you don't have one, you need to get with your broker, you need to get with your skill set group and create one, not just the printed packaging for it, but an actual presentation and practice it. And this presentation of a buyer brokerage engagement and why it's important to get signed is part of that buyer presentation. So we're just chunking down little pieces of this and practicing the specific skills in the ninja skill set groups. And then you're going to take all of this and mush it together and be a ninja. So, hi Avery, how are you today?
I am doing
great. We're going to pretend like we're getting ready to go see some houses. And this is the first time that we've been together, and you're not going to be willing to really sign it up front for a length of time. So we're going to go through that one because that's a key point that's there. So I'll explain it, and then you can say, but I'm not real comfortable. I don't know you yet. That kind, you know where we're headed with this, and I'll give them a tool to make this work a little easier. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay. So Avery, I'm glad that you took the time to meet with me. I think I have a clear picture of what you're looking for as a buyer. Thank you so much for filling out the dream home request form. I think we've got some stuff down, and I know we're going to see the 2 or 3 that you've picked out today. But as I said before, we have a way of working with each other, myself and my brokerage, in representing you in a home purchase. So as I said before, we were going to go over that briefly before we started seeing houses. So can we do that real quickly right now?
Sure.
Okay, so here's the form. Pretend like I gave it to her upside down and backwards. This is the exclusive buyer brokerage engagement, and it is the law here in Georgia that we have this in writing. So let me just go over the terms with you. This first page, section A, every single paragraph is mirrored with an explanation in section B. And normally I would have the agreement and I push them aside. I show them section A and section B and walk them through how each of those paragraphs mirror each other, and the explanation is there. For instance, this is an exclusive agreement. This means that you're only going to work with me and my firm as your agent. Now, if for some reason something happens to me and I'm indisposed, or let's say you and I don't work well together, you're still a client of my brokerage, and my broker will step in and find you someone else to represent you if something like that should come up. That's paragraph A. And I always point out Harry Norman Realtors, me, and the client. Does that sound okay? And then the second part is the term, which means how long we're going to work together. Now, in my experience, most people take about 6 months to find a home. I think you're going to find what you're looking for more in 30 to 45 days. So, but I would still like to have the term be for around 3 to 6 months, whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay.
So I'm an independent contractor. I'm not an employee of Harry Norman. We do not offer sub-agencies. So if you go back to the forms that I sent you, there's an ABCs of Agency Relationship Disclosure, the one that I talked about. Yeah, just stick it in the folder and stick it on your desk or the back of your toilet, and you can read it at your leisure. You might want to grab that one if you want to know what sub-agency is. But we do represent you in a buyer's agency capacity here. Commission. I work for 3.5% commission, and then there's a 225 flat portion of the commission that is due at closing. Now, there's no separate commission on a lease because you're not leasing a property. You're already a lease that we're trying to get you out of. And then you'll notice that there's section B, and then there's all the mirroring. Then you're going to go through section C, which is here's how we play together. This first section of B is how my broker's duties to you, and then section 2 is the buyer's duties, your duties back to me in this relationship. Also, then you go through, I'm not going to read this whole contract and go through every single piece of it day. There's fair housing, limits on authority and responsibility, be certain everything is in writing and verified, be certain that you pay attention to all of the disclosures. And then the disclosure of potentially fraudulent activities. There's lots of things that can happen in a real estate transaction. There's buyer fraud, there's all different kinds of things. But basically, this one also says that if you think that I'm committing fraud in any way, you're obligated to report me, and vice versa. So we're all going to play nice in the sandbox. Arbitration, we always agree to go to arbitration first. That is part of our contract. There's no imputed knowledge. Everything is in writing. The governing law is the state of Georgia, and you just keep going through it. This is the entire agreement. This is a GAR form, which is Georgia Association of Realtors form. That means it is created by the Georgia Association of Realtors, and it's even-handed. It doesn't mean it's cited towards me as a realtor or that it's cited toward you as a buyer. It's created out there to protect the public and also preserve our relationship and the professionalism of realtors. Time is of the essence. That means you get back to me as quickly as you possibly can in all of this. Cyber fraud, gone over that with you before. There's also a pullout disclosure that's at the end of this that we're going to sign. Here's the brochures, the ones I've already shown you. They're checked on here, blah, 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 blah. So there's a brief overview. Now in the negotiation class, we go through it in more detail, and in the buyer conversion class and with your own broker, you can go over it more in detail, so you're explaining it exactly as it needs to be. But the final thing that I would do is I turn this back around to her, and I'm going to look at Avery and I'm going to go, so how does all that sound to you?
Oh, am I muted? No, I'm here. I thought I was muted. Well, you know, Jill, it sounds great, and I really appreciate you taking the time to go over this with me. And you know, you explained it really well. But I'm a reader, so I really want to go back home, read through this, make sure I'm comfortable with it. I never sign contracts as soon as they're put in front of me because I like to digest them. So I think we should be able to work together, and I really like you, and everything that you're saying about Harry Norman and yourself sounds great, but if it's okay, I'm just not comfortable signing this quite yet.
So you're not comfortable right yet?
No, not yet.
Is there any other explanation that I can give you? Is there a place or a point in this contract that seems to be giving you a little bit of heartburn, so that I'm sure that when you're looking at it later, you have the answer?
Well, I do want to make sure that if for some reason something happens and I decide not to buy a home, that I won't owe you or your company any commission. That I'm kind of nervous about that.
Okay. Well, first of all, and let's do this. This is only going to be, we can sign this for two different ways. The only time you're going to owe me a commission is if you do purchase a home, or if this agreement is still in place, meaning you haven't fired me or my company, and you go outside of us in the protected period that's in here and buy outside of the agreement. And that's not what you're going to do. You're a very honorable person, and I know that if I was ever making mistakes or making missteps, that you would tell me and we could get back on track, or my broker could find someone else for you within where we are. So right now, in the space that we are, to see these houses that we're going to see today, the 3 that you've picked out, I need something in place so that I can negotiate on your behalf, that I can keep all of your information confidential, and that I can provide you with that best service that you want. Because you said you wanted someone to help you negotiate. You wanted someone to help you make those decisions. And without this agreement in place, those are not things that I can do for you. And if you find one of these houses today that you're ready to move forward on, there's an issue. Now I'm going to say this aside. If somebody absolutely is a reader and they must take it back and read it, be certain that you're doing this early enough in that buyer presentation that they have it, so you're not doing it on the trunk of the car going into a house like we're about to do. So that's my aside. So back to Avery. So how about this for today? Let's take this particular agreement and date it just for today, the period that you and I are together. And then you'll note the little FMLS numbers up on the printouts that I've given you with the addresses. Why don't we handwrite those in as a special stipulation at the end of this agreement that only for the specific houses that I'm going to show you today, would you owe Harry Norman a commission, but only if you go outside of the agreement. Because by virtue of our membership with FMLS and the fact that we're only seeing FMLS properties today, the broker that has it listed has already, and the dogs bark, already agreed to split the commission with me, and I will have my full commission by virtue of that relationship and membership to FMLS. So you will owe me nothing because these are listed. How does that sound if we write that into this agreement so we can keep moving forward down the field, and then we'll revisit it later at length so that you can get all of your questions answered. And if I need to bring my broker in as well, if you have further questions that I can't answer, I can do that. But that will allow us to move forward today. Chanel! Sorry, guys. How does that sound, Avery?
I mean, I think that sounds great. I feel better about that it's just for today. And if we don't find something today, then we can circle back and figure out what this agreement looks like. You know, you explained everything great. So I feel okay with signing it if it's just for today.
Just for today. So what we'll do is we'll do this, and while we're talking, I'm usually writing down the information in the special stipulation portion, and we're going through it all. And then I say, Avery, so this one's just for today and just for these houses. When we get back together next weekend, which is your next available time, or next Wednesday, to see some more houses, if none of these are a fit for you, what I want to do then is address the time frame and what we're doing. This will also give you and I a chance today to work in the field together, so you can see how I work and I can see how you work, and we can both mutually decide that we want to continue the relationship. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds great.
You turn the pen on, or your tablet, if you're working from a tablet so they can sign online, write to them and say, all I need is your okay right here. You put the pen in their hand open on the line. You make it easy for them to sign. You put their finger right here, just like when you're at a restaurant or somewhere and they bring the tablet over for you, you sign right here and it gives you a 15, a 20, a 25% tip. It makes it brainless. You need to make it that simple for them to say yes. Does that kind of make sense to everybody as far as how it works? And you can then negotiate back. The next time we get with Avery, I'm going to greet her and say, hi, these are the houses we're going to see today, blah, 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 blah. I've already spent some time answering any questions that she might have had ahead of time. And then I will say to her, Avery, we signed the buyer brokerage engagement for the day last time, and you sent me the questions. I've answered all of them. I think we're playing from the same playbook, and I really would like to work with you and continue this relationship. Would you? What would you say? Don't say heck no.
I say that sounds amazing.
Good answer. So then, well, remember we signed the other one. So this one I have already filled out for a 3-month period of time that you and I will play exclusively together. So all I need is your okay on this one, just like you okayed the last one. And she would probably say, okay. So then, yeah. So that's pretty much it. And try to stay away from all I need is your signature, all I need is your step. Try to say all I need is your okay, because that's a much less threatening way of presenting any kind of document. Use that with the purchase and sale agreement. Once you get somebody ready to do a purchase and sale agreement and you filled out all this stuff, you call them back, you go over all the details with them. Say, okay, how does that sound to you? And if they have questions, you can address them. But most of the time they will say, okay, say, well, all I need is your okay on that line. Just go ahead and sign it electronically then, and we'll get it submitted. So that's it, how to get that buyer brokerage engagement signed. First, you have to have a buyer consultation. You have to spend some time with them to develop that trust, to develop that relationship, to let them know that you hear what they're asking for. What is their dream home request? Use those intake forms from Ninja to figure out what it is, figure out their goals, ask them what it looks like. Also, don't be afraid if they've bought or sold property before, asking them, hey guys, especially if it's a couple. I know you've bought and sold a few other properties. Can you tell me where the hangups were in any of those contracts, or any places that you felt uncomfortable when you were buying or selling before? Because I'd like to go ahead and be certain to address those questions for you up front in today's playground, because it's been 5 years since you've bought or sold with today's contract. So where were the tangles that you had in the transactions before? Go ahead and address those. Go ahead and get your clients to begin negotiating already. Go ahead and set up the game and how it looks, i.e., we're going to suit up, we're going to put on our pads, we're going to put on our uniforms, we're going to run out into the field, be certain to put your shoes on, and you tell them kind of how it's going to look. That's the same thing you need to be doing in a buyer or a seller presentation, especially when you're getting the listing agreement signed. Now, let me tell you how this is going to play out, because we've listed your house now. You can have offers as soon as tomorrow. Most of our properties have multiple offers. So let's get prepared with the new contract and how those negotiations are going to go. So you set it up, because there's so many places for negotiation. There's price, there's terms, there's time frame, there's different conditions. It's you on behalf of a buyer. Are you coming in with cash? Are you coming in with a pre-qualification letter or a pre-approval letter, which is your briefcase full of money? Are you using prosperity mortgage, where all you have to do is plug in the property address? You're already ready to go. What are you doing, and how are you moving through those things? So doing little mini playbooks and sitting with your buyers and your sellers and walking them through what it looks like to negotiate ahead of time, when it actually comes down and you have that offer or you're making that offer, you can very easily back up and say, now remember when I mentioned to you before that when we got ready to do an amendment to address concerns, we didn't want to put absolutely everything on there. We want to have the important things that are there, and we need some negotiating points, and we need to have some conversations, but we don't need to put that chain for the fan pull on there. That's really not something that should go on there. And you have these conversations with people ahead of time, so by the time you're in the heat of the battle, so to speak, they understand the maneuvering and how you give a little, you get a little, you give a little, you get a little. And only in those pre-listing and the listing and the pre-buyer and the buyer consultations are you going to be able to identify their trigger points and be able to move them through that sticky wicket, if you will. Does that make sense to everybody? Does anybody have any questions? If somebody can see the chat box, Avery or Ashu, share whatever people are typing in or their deeds. Because I can see nothing.
Sure.
I see Ashu's smiling face.
Can I just give everybody some feedback on what you and Avery just accomplished?
Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me okay, Jill?
Yep.
Okay, great. Just a little feedback on what you and Avery just accomplished. First of all, kudos. You both deserve an Oscar for that. Tough buyer and persistent agent. That's awesome. And I think, buyers, okay, kind of wanting to take a wait and see approach. Let me go think about it. And then you asking for pain points was a great approach in getting to learn exactly what is the buyer hesitating about. And then, of course, explaining that, it's customary for the seller to pay the commission, because I think the buyer's biggest pain point generally is, am I going to be on the hook for paying commission if I'm hiring you? And so once they know that it's customary for the seller to pay it, and the only times that buyer pays it, in this contract with us or breaking the purchase contract with the seller, then really breaking control. It's not something in our control. If they're not going to do something unlawful with the contract, they don't need to worry about those clauses, for asking us to remove those clauses, even after they've gone back and thought about and read the agreement, and press on that point. So that's a little bit of a tip on that one.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody, anything out there, a challenge that you have in getting the buyer's agency agreement signed? Or is there a challenge that you have in a negotiation you're currently involved in right now that you'd like to bring to the table? Because we have 10 more minutes that we can work on skills and help you guys with what you're dealing with. We always like real life examples. Those are fun.
And as we're monitoring the chat box and perhaps some questions coming through on that front, Jill, I might want to add to our folks as well that where you're not going to represent the buyer as a client and you're just going to perform some ministerial duties and tasks for them as a customer, it's equally important, guys, to get a customer acknowledgement form signed, because that again sets the gameplay for the relationship and what you're going to do, what you're not going to do, and what the buyer's obligated to do if they're going to use your services. And so I often see that an agent will give the importance that's due to getting the ink on the buyer brokerage agreement, but they might not give that same importance to getting ink on a customer acknowledgement form. And so I'm suggesting that you give it good importance as well for those good reasons. And I'll be happy to discuss an item or two on the amendment to address concerns as well as agents try to negotiate through that. Some best practices there if we've got some time.
We still have 10 minutes left, and I don't know why I'm not seeing any questions at all. I don't see answered or unanswered questions on my bar here. So I am getting text from agents that are texting and asking questions, but let's
Anything
see.
you want to address there? Yeah.
Give me 1 second so I can go through.
Yeah, sure, go ahead. Since you touched on the amendment to address concerns and the inspection report, how to kind of work through that. One question I've gotten somewhat commonly before is whether the agent should attach, the buyer's agent should attach the full inspection report to the amendment to address concerns when they're presenting it over to the seller. What's your in the field thought on that?
I believe that it shows a level of professionalism. I know that there are some firms out there that train their agents not to receive it because they believe if they are not in receipt of the full inspection report, then therefore by virtue of agency, the seller is not in receipt of the full inspection report, and therefore if there's anything that they might have to disclose because they're in receipt of it, they wouldn't have to disclose it. It's really kind of just not playing in a fair way, I think, with anybody. And so I think that if you have one that has detailed questions and detailed issues, it's helpful to do the amendment to address concerns and tell them specifically what you want to be repaired, and then reference that portion in the attached inspection report, especially with the picture reference as well. And then what you've done is you've provided that seller and that seller's agent with the best information that you can give them to address the concern in an appropriate way. And if for some reason, because you've seen this, occasionally a buyer will select their own inspector, and sometimes not all inspectors are worth their salt. And some just put stuff down on those inspection reports, or upon further evaluation, because they're not plumbers, they're not electricians, they're not these hyper professional people that really understand electricians and electricity coming into a house and what the needs are based on the age of the home and the load of the home. So if you give a seller that information and the seller then goes to an electrician and says, here's what they're saying and what they're asking for, the electrician can say, I understand that is true, we can fix it. Or the electrician can say, I see what they're saying, however, here's the code. Here's what we do. Here are current practices, and this is how we address something like this. Or they can basically just say that's, horse hockey. So, but at least you're playing from the same playbook. And if you're not giving them all that information, meh. And guess what? When they open that email, that's notice. When they open that email and you have a return receipt on there and that email is attached in there, now some will get sneaky and they'll try not to accept your email. But if you've done it through app files, you have a record for it. And if you've done return receipt requested in Outlook, you get that too. From a legal standpoint, I don't know that it's, a nail in the coffin, so to speak, but I think that you have a better standing for getting something done if you give them more information rather than less.
Yeah, I think for practical purposes and negotiation to go well, and as well as from a legal standpoint, it's a good idea to specify the repairs as detailed as possible in the amendment to address concerns and attach any, reference any, supporting sections of the inspection report to do that. What I've seen, some lazy agents out there, not any of ours, but from some competitive companies, and I'm really being truthful about that because I think our agents know better to kind of follow the professionalism and detailed process that you're talking about for best negotiation. But out there, I have seen an amendment come in with nothing but a line that says, see inspection report. And I think that can invalidate, the amendment as well from a legal standpoint, because you're not specifying which item is to be repaired or replaced. You're not specifying when is it to be repaired or replaced. What exactly is the work to be done. So the lack of specificity, the ambiguity that comes with it is what would, I think, defeat validity of that amendment. So from that standpoint too, I like the approach of specifying in detail in the amendment. And like I said, inclusion, I agree with your inclusion of some, reference points to the inspection report to allow the negotiation and understanding of the request to be, going flowing and be better.
I will say there's one thing that we see a lot, and I'm sure Avery can attest to this too. We get at least one call a month on this. And it is other agents that are either wanting to submit amendment to address concerns at the last possible minute, sort of to force the seller's hand to accept it, or the seller delaying a response. So that being said, it's going to happen, but you need to call it out and call it like it is when you see it. And you can do this with two techniques. One is a technique that I call nighttime DJ voice. And if any of you have ever sat in my negotiation class, you've heard the nighttime DJ voice. And so basically, if I was talking to a shoe and I had the seller and she was delaying getting me the amendment to address concerns, and we're within 24 hours or maybe 48 even of the expiration of the due diligence period, we're like, a shoe, how are you? Remember, in person via video or phone is always best. It's not going to work via text, and it's not going to work for you to leave a voicemail. You need a live person on the other phone with you. And you need to say, Ashu, it's Jill. I'm sure you know that the due diligence period expires tomorrow at midnight. And my sellers are anxiously awaiting that. Do you have it ready yet? And she's going to go, well, we're this or that. And so, but you take the fire out of it. You say, well, I know you're not one of those agents that waits until the last possible minute trying to force the seller into something. So just so you know, my sellers are really anxious and would love to get that and want to keep this deal together, but they're not going to agree to do anything or feel forced that way. I think they would rather see your buyer walk and us come back to the table with a different agreement. And I would hate to do that to your buyers. And you just say it very plainly. And if the shoe's on the other foot, you can say something simply like, we're just that let's see. The best way to say it when it comes out is just call them out on the fact that they could potentially be doing this. Now, know if you've hit a nerve or it's a negotiating tactic that they've been taught by their broker to do is delay those things because there's time frame that's there. Do not be afraid to play chicken, especially in this marketplace, because we usually have multiple backup offers as well that you can move on from and move on to. So know that that's there. Take the fire out of it. Be that step down transformer with that nighttime DJ voice. You know, I know you're not one of those agents. I know you're not. When can we expect it? And you just call them out on that particular tactic. And usually that will stop it in its tracks. Ultimately, you may have to play a little chicken with them for the time frame, but you will ultimately succeed on behalf of your client. But always label it exactly what it is as a tactic and say, I don't play that way, in a very soothing voice. And it usually takes the fire out of that and helps them learn to negotiate a different way. So that's just 2 simple tactics that you can use. And you can use that nighttime DJ voice anytime. It works well with teenagers too, if you have any at home. Doesn't usually work on dogs. Maybe a spouse or a partner, you can see. Does anybody have any other concerns or any other challenges that you have right now in the marketplace? Please text me, text Avery, text Ashu. If you have her number, you probably don't. Anything else? Because we have like 2 minutes left that we can address anything anybody has.
I love it. And while they're doing that, you know, if the shoe is on the other foot, on the buyer's foot, and the buyer is running against the clock on, against a due diligence period clock on submitting that repair amendment, buyer could build into the amendment, the late amendment, a termination notice. I just caution on that approach. That's not an approach that a buyer or buyer's agents should use regularly, because once they have drawn that line in the sand that, hey, Miss Seller, if you don't agree to these requests by a certain time, this agreement stands terminated, the seller can bank on that and move to the backup offer. Like you're saying, it's a multiple offer situation. And so buyers do need to be very careful with drawing that land in the sand while they're trying to also preserve their, you know, termination right in that same document.
Yeah, the only time that I would suggest ever doing that and playing chicken in that way is if it truly is something that is a major issue with the house, say a crack in the foundation, that is repairable. If there's water intrusion, that is fixable, that you know from the inspector it's fixable, but is something that is costly. Maybe even radon mitigation, because that's several $1,000s. And you know, even water quality and things like that if they have a family. You have to have spent a lot of time with your buyers and really understand what success looks like to them. So that way you know if it's something that they would be willing to walk away from. Don't ever play chicken or do anything like that without your buyers truly understanding that this means you could lose the house. And no one likes to work that hard and then lose the deal. But you can resubmit if there's nothing else out there too. So, and maybe with a cleaner contract if you're further along in it. Well, I'm not saying anything else. Okay, Patrice has brought up something on text that the inspection is paid for by the buyer and the results belong to the buyer. That is a concern. However, I always say in my buyer conversion, in my buyer presentation, something of the nature that we're going to have an inspection done and they're going to provide you with a report. You're going to share that report with me, and I'm going to use that to draft the agreement. When we draft the agreement and they sign that ATAC, they're acknowledging on every line item where I stated in attached inspection report, paragraph C, section 7, blah, 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 you know, with a picture attached. So they're acknowledging that we are sharing that with them. So the only time that really,
you've gotten buyer's permission up front, right? To share.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So you walk them through all those pieces, and the final thing is when that ATAC goes over and they sign it, they're signing where it says in attached inspection report. So they are actually signing the fact that you're sending it with it. So they know that you are sharing it. So those are your places. And you're welcome, Patrice. Well, I think that's it. I do have a couple more. I'm going to encourage you. We do have that longer negotiation class where we can dig into some of these techniques like the nighttime FMDJ stuff and go more into the purchase and sale agreement, go more into the ATAC, go more into those customer representation forms and how they look. So keep your eyes peeled for those. If you do have any specific questions, go to your broker. Reach out to anyone on the leadership team. Ashu is available. We'll be happy to get you the best answer we possibly can for any of your challenges. But by all means, come to the negotiation class armed with questions that you want answered, and we'll give you the good techniques to get through them. I hope you all have a really, really lovely Monday and the rest of the week. Go be fantastic. See y'all later.
Thank you, everybody.